Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome, welcome. We still have some people trickling in, but we might as well get started for everybody who was here on time. My name is Nadia Mori, and I'm pleased to welcome you on behalf of the Peace Region Living Lab and the Peace River Forge Association of BC. And thank you for joining us on a really important discussion today on Indigenous fire stewardship, bringing good fire back. And we're grateful to have this conversation because fire and the stewardship and the shared learning across communities are more important than ever, especially around fire. And today is about hearing and learning from the Indigenous perspective on the long history of good fire on the land and the long-standing ways of caring for the land. This webinar is really a continuation of the work that we've been doing across the Peace region through a larger movement towards ruralization of wildfire in the Pyrocene, as well as an ongoing research project we're working on to look at the outcomes of prescribed fire on soil carbon and soil microbial responses to fire. And before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. So as you noted, this webinar is being recorded, and the recording afterwards will be shared through both the Peace Region Living Lab and the Peace River Forge Association website. If questions do come up during the webinar, we ask you to please type them in the chat, and we will monitor the chat for questions as they come in. And then time permitting, we will also have a guided Q&A session at the very end. And during the webinar, we ask you to please keep yourself muted so we have the floor fully available for our speakers and the moderator. If for some technical reason we do get disconnected, just try and join again and we'll get us back on the road. And we hope today's conversation will help us build more understanding, highlight common ground that we share with our shared goals, and encourage continued relationship building and learning. And with that, I would like to hand it over to my colleague and co-host, Dr. Sonja Leverkus.
Right on. Thank you, Nadia. And I have a feeling one of our speakers might be in the waiting room. Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Just give me a second to admit a few more people here.
Okay. Right on. As you do that, I just want to say thank you all for being here with us today. We're grateful and honored to live and work within Treaty 8 territory and all these beautiful lands that are stewarded here by Casca and Indigenous communities, including Métis communities, and all of us who are longtime residents of this wonderful land here in Northeast British Columbia. I'm calling in from Fort Nelson, and really excited to welcome our two amazing speakers to speak with us today, as Nadia has said, about Indigenous fire stewardship. We have a couple slides. Nadia, I can't quite remember, are slide 2, 3, and 4 for at the end?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Good stuff to come.
Okay, wonderful. So if you are looking for more information about the work that we've all done all together here in Northeast BC, we'll share that at the end. As Nadia had mentioned, we will have a question and answer period at the very end. We're going to start out our session here with some introductions, and then we're going to talk about Indigenous fire stewardship and how that may influence soil and here soil health in the Peace River watershed, and then talk about some Indigenous fire stewardship in Australia and how that might relate to Canada, what some creative funding possibilities could be to consider from Australia and Canada, as both our speakers have visited in Australia before. And then we're going to talk about some challenges and successes and recommendations, as well as partnerships and what this can look like together as we all put good fire back on the land together, perhaps discussion around implementing wildland firefighting and the really awesome collaborations that are possible. Before we hand it over to our speakers, I do just want to add we've got two additional speakers who are definitely being put on the spot. They're here on the top of your screen and they're nodding. I'll do a quick intro to them, and then when we incorporate them into our question and answers. They'll talk a bit more about themselves, but David Wilmsmeyer and Donovan Bertrand have joined us as well. They're with Northern Fireworks as our senior crew leaders, and um, they'll be speaking with you also in a little bit. So without further ado, Nadia, are you doing good on your end as far as technology goes? Yep. Okay, wonderful. So my good friend Dane, who are you? What do you do? And how did you get to where you are today in 10 minutes or less?
Thanks, Sonja, and thank you, Nadia, for putting this on and having me here. And also like to extend my gratitude to the other speakers today and everybody for joining. Appreciate you really filling up the chat here, and yeah, it's very exciting to be here. So, my name is Dane de Souza. I'm a citizen of the Métis Nation of Alberta, born and raised in Treaty 7 territory, Mohkinstsis, Calgary, Alberta. Um, Right now, I currently work as the Senior Policy Advisor for Emergency Management at the Métis National Council. But my career for the past 15 years, almost 13, I think it is, has been really focused around my true passion of wildfire. Back in 2013, I started my career as a wildland firefighter, as a Helitack wildland firefighter out of the Rocky Mountain House District in central Alberta there. And what was really just a summer job that I was hoping to pay for school with, and I was horrifically underqualified to get. Immediately just turned into a lifelong passion. Like I'll never forget seeing my first smoke on the horizon and just immediately knowing I was hooked and there was nothing else I could do in life to uh, not only put food on the table but also live in a good way if it wasn't connected to wildfires. So I spent 6 years working Helitack out of Shunda and was fortunate enough to work with some amazing folks and fought fire from the Yukon to Idaho, BC, Ontario, all throughout Alberta, with several stints in the Peace River area, which I absolutely loved. I think it's probably one of the most underrated and beautiful landscapes on the planet. Um, in 2019-18, I headed down to Australia to try to get a gig fighting fire there. But unfortunately, unbeknownst to me, there was a hiring freeze put on for foreign nationals to the department that I applied to. So I ended up trimming trees for the city of Melbourne and tending bars. And from there, I kind of made the decision that I would need to find a way to advance my career in wildfire management by any means possible. So I applied to the University of British Columbia to do a Master's of International Forestry. It was a 1 year program, and it was really in its kind of like infancy at that time. I think it was only the third year that the program was offered, which is awesome because it offered me a lot of flexibility to focus my research on studies on things that interested me. And what I really focused my time at UBC on was looking into Indigenous fire stewardship and its application as a climate change adaptation and mitigation solution. What I was really interested on was how Indigenous fire stewardship techniques, the knowledge and science behind it in what is now known as Canada and across the world, really could be mobilized to places that are experiencing forest fires on a scale they haven't seen before as a result of climate change. So places like Armenia, Greece, Spain, places that you don't really, associate with pyroecology, but are starting to make international headlines. So through that, I was fortunate enough to graduate a bit early and then start working at the city of Calgary, staring at trees and getting yelled at by taxpayers about how trees are ruining their lives. And I knew it wasn't sustainable from a long-term career. And I was fortunate enough to have met during my master's the person who would eventually become my boss. And she hired me to do some research on the Métis connection to fire stewardship and wildfire in general. And through that, I was able to start some amazing work with Sonja. And since then, I've had the absolute honor and pleasure of serving my nation, my community, to help make it safer at times and you know place and to help try to reestablish our connection to good fire and how that connects us to the land. So that kind of brings us to where we're at today. During this time over the past about 3 years, I've been working on some pretty focused research on overcoming some of the systemic barriers to Indigenous fire stewardship that we face in Canada, and really trying to build the case for how all folks who share this land can come together around the truths of good fire and fire stewardship and reconcile those for a safer, healthier, cleaner environment that we all depend on here. So that's who I am. And yeah, I just want to acknowledge that I probably wouldn't be on this call or telling this story if it weren't for many of the folks who are on this call that have enabled that. And I'm just absolutely flattered to be sharing this space with Chad and the other speakers as they, influenced my career and how I've approached it pretty heavily. So that's me, and I'll pass it back to you now, Sonja.
Marcy, Dane, thank you so much. Thanks for being here with us. And you're getting some love online as well. Hopefully you see that. Wonderful. Our second speaker is Chad Thomas, our brother from up the highway. And so Chad, who are you? What do you do? And how did you get to where you are today?
Yeah. Hi. Thanks, Anya. My name's Chad Thomas. I'm a member of the Tahltan First Nation. I'm also have am a Casca Ancestry member. I've been in emergency management for 24 years now. I started in Watson Lake, about a 20-minute drive from the fire base that we work out of now. So things kind of went a bit full circle. I could talk a little bit about that. I'm the director of Aboriginal Land Protection Services for the Daylu Dena Council, and I started off my career in Watson as a Type 3 firefighter in southeastern Yukon, and I worked in that position for one summer, and then I spent the rest of my for about 10 years. I went to go work for the Yukon Territorial Government. I had an opportunity at the time earlier on in my career to work with First Nation contract firefighters, Type 1 groups, but at that time, First Nation crews didn't have the same access to training, equipment, and operational opportunities. So I made a decision to work for the Yukon Territorial Government. I was pretty torn with that decision at the time. But I spent a decade working with the government, and I fought fire all across the Yukon in every base, and I traveled a lot into different districts. And I fought fire in British Columbia, probably about 12 tours in total. And I fought fire in Alberta, Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and I think 6 tours in the States, in Washington State, Oregon, and Idaho. And then also and then about 10 years into my career, I made a switch to start working with First Nations Indigenous fire crews, and I've been doing that ever since. I was the first fire manager in the Yukon to manage multiple Indigenous fire crews, and that led into me starting a company called Yukon First Nations Wildfire, and we ran all the Indigenous wildland fire crews in the Yukon. And that grew. We started that company with 2 folks, and then it ended up growing into the largest contract wildfire organization in the country. And we're really, really proud of that. We were just working in the Yukon, and then one day we found out we were running such a big show nationally. But with that group, I managed to go on a fire. I started going on a fire tour in 2015, and I fought fire in Australia. And then I ended up going back when the fires were happening in 2019, when things were super chaotic, and I fought some fire and worked with some Indigenous cultural burn specialists, and that was really eye opening. It kind of changed my perspective on how I outlook or look into the industry, and kind of ways that we can adapt certain things for here, which I'll touch on later on in the conversation. And then in 2023, I was hired by the Daylu Dena Council to help get their emergency management response program up and going, and now we're branching off with some more crews, and we got some pretty savvy young up and coming firefighters that are really taking the lead on Indigenous emergency management in northwestern British Columbia. Bit of a difference working from the Yukon for the majority of my career, and I know I've been on a lot of fire tours in BC, but when you're running a fire program, the differences between the Yukon and British Columbia are pretty substantial. So it was a bit of a learning curve there for a bit, and now we're up and going. And it was also kind of neat when me and my best friend, we grew up together in Teslin, Yukon, southern Yukon community, and we started fighting fire together, and when we were 19, and we worked together for a good 8 or 9 years, and then he left and he came back in the fold of emergency management, and now we're kind of co-running the fire crews and lower posts. So it's kind of exciting to kind of have things go full circle with that relationship. And yeah, I mean, we've done lots of excuse me, we've done lots of different things with expanding our availability. We're fire response, but we do lots of prevention work, fire smart, fuel mitigation, modified tree stands. We do prescribed fire. We do cultural burning, flood response. We have EMS training that is really taken fold in northwestern BC that our crews are working on, and we're working with volunteer fire departments, and kind of trying to take a bit more of a regional approach to the area, because there's not a lot of population in northwestern BC, and so it's often for a forgotten about area. So it's really exciting to work with all the different communities and see them kind of grow. But it's been quite a great career to kind of get into. Like, I encourage all young people to do it. I think that the young people that we work with, and watching them evolve and watching them grow is really fun and exciting, because I've been on so many fires that when I see a water bomber drop or I see a big helicopter drop on the fire, it's kind of just another day for me. But then when you look at everybody get excited and they get to see these really cool operations happen on the fire line or prescribed burn, and they get really excited. So you get to kind of live a little bit through them on that. And yeah, I mean, I've kind of really focused, I would say probably, like, as an emergency management specialist, I'm really more of a Indigenous emergency management specialist. Like, I focus mainly on Indigenous firefighters and growing more Indigenous fire crews across the north, and just making sure that they have the top tier training and the top tier equipment, and then they're getting the top tier jobs on the wildfire, and making sure that Indigenous firefighters get to showcase their talents. In British Columbia, there's around 800 ministry firefighters and around 1,600 to 2,200 contract firefighting resources. So, there's a lot of opportunity there for First Nations emergency management to grow, which is really, really my goal, is to grow that industry. So, we mainly will focus on the response, but there's a big chunk of the preventative measures that we try to work on when we're not busy and responding to all these fires. So, I've been talking with Sonja lots over a 10-year span, and bouncing ideas off of her, and really doing a lot of sharing of knowledge with her. And last year I got to go respond with my crew earlier on in the spring to fire those happening in Fort Nelson, and I actually got to fight fire with her for a few days. So that was a lot of fun and exciting to actually get out there and just kick some ash with a friend that you've known a long time but never really got to do that, right? And I think that that's one of the things that's always really exciting about the industry is that you get to work with so many amazing people and watch them grow, and then you never stop learning, and it really is a real family. Being in emergency management, first responders. So it's really exciting to always get to work with people and constantly learn and constantly evolve and get better at different things. So that's one thing I think I always like about the industry the most is that you never stop learning. You're always learning new things every year. Things don't really get stale. Like if you feel like you know everything, then you should probably really get a reality check, because there's so that we're in a constantly evolving, very volatile environment. So we have to learn how to evolve with the landscape and with the changing of times and different techniques. So it's a really exciting industry. So yeah, no, I'm really thankful to and honored to be invited to talk about my experiences and kind of what I know about a few things. And I'm more than happy to answer any questions or follow up with me anytime. So yeah, that's my intro. Thanks.
Hmm. Masicho, thank you, Chad. That was an epic time last summer for sure, with our crews working together and getting a chance to work together in person. What you were saying about bringing young people on and encouraging young folks to join our profession, I would like to give two of our younger folks who are speakers as well the chance to introduce themselves as well. And so maybe Donovan, you could go first. And what we're looking for, you don't have to say as much as Chad and Dane if you don't want to, but if you can let us know who you are, what you do, and maybe a bit of your experience in fire. Over to you, Don.
Hello. Um, my name's Donovan Bertrand, and I'm one of the crew leads for Northern Fireworks and up and coming forest tech for Shifting Mosaics Consulting. And some of my experiences firefighting would be um, I've done some tours in Northwest Territories, mainly around the Fort Nelson area, and a couple down towards the Prince George area. And I've been getting into training for structural protection as well as home ignition zone assessments.
Awesome. Thank you, Don. What have you been on prescribed fires before?
I have been on prescribed fires.
Nice. For how many years?
I think this will be my 7th year.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. Right on. And your colleague there, David Wilmsmeyer, tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
My name's David Wilmsmeyer. I'm one of the senior crew leads for Northern Fireworks, same as Donovan, becoming a forest tech for shifting. I've been with the company now going on 6 years, year 6, and a lot of it's the same as what Donovan was saying. Been up to the Northwest Territories, all the way down to Tumbler Ridge, which was my first real experience with a full deployment. So that was it's kind of like what Dane was saying, just immediately fell in love with firefighting, and been on a few prescribed fires down in Burns Lake back in 2022. And yeah, just kind of getting introduced to the more, I guess, sciencey technological side of it all. So it's it's exciting. That's all I
Awesome.
really gotta say.
Awesome. You're all getting lots of love online. Hopefully that you can see that. So thanks, David, as well for your intro. So we would like to now shift over to a bit of a discussion by Dane, talking about Indigenous fire stewardship and potential interactions on soil health in the piece. And Nadia, I think that there might be some slides that Dane might have. Dane, is that right? You've got some slides you're hoping for Nadia to share?
Yeah, I just tossed together a couple visual aids real quick here to kind of help guide a bit of what I'm talking about today. And I should preface this all by saying I'm not an agricultural expert, not a soil health expert. This is a bit of a modified kind of discussion on a lecture I gave at George Washington University 2, 3 years ago about kind of different ways of knowing in science and how science is valued and whatnot. And in it, I kind of focused on a bit of like what at the core of the conversation was the land and the environment provides, and we as humans adapt and build our cultures, our worldviews, our life ways, our societies, our structures of social structures, I guess, based off of how the land provides and how we interact with it. So with that, if we could take it to slide 1, I'll kind of see if I can dust off the brain here to this present kind of side of the presentation. But when anthropologists and agricultural anthropologists kind of talk about the 7 different agricultural heaths, or the 7 different identified places where agriculture was developed by humans over the course of humanity as we currently know agriculture. There's 7 places that they've kind of settled on, or that are where there's agreement that these are places where agriculture developed in its own way, for lack of a better term, kind of spontaneously, if you will. So the one I'll be focusing on today is the Fertile Crescent, but the other ones are based in East Asia and China, what is now China, along the Yellow and Yangtze rivers, the archipelagos of Southeast Asia, so that Indonesia, kind of Philippines kind of area around there, Sub-Saharan Africa around Ethiopia, and kind of the Horn of Africa, Mesoamerica, so where I'm calling to you from right now, the Mexico City kind of area, or what was known as Tenochtitlan, South America with the Incans and the different empires and societies had grown there. Which, if you ever get the chance to go to South America and learn about potatoes and corn and how Incan culture was able to develop agriculture there, it is probably the most mind-blowing feats of engineering I've ever seen in my life firsthand. So a little shout out there. And then Central Asia around the Indus River Valley. These are areas where it's been determined that agriculture as we know it in a modern sense were developed. But when you kind of zoom out a little and think about land management to provide sustenance, is farming the only way that's been done? And then you have this term hunter-gatherer that is kind of ambiguous and kind of just put to the side a little here. But if you have the ability right now, I would encourage you to pull up Google Maps and then zoom out on North America. And I would encourage you to look at the Great Plains, and think of the Great Plains as the largest agricultural engineering project in human history. Those Great Plains that sustain buffalo and elk and pronghorns and you name it, and all the different native plants and species that sustain life and enabled places like the mound cities in what is now the St. Louis area known as Cahokia, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, to grow and thrive. We don't talk about how folks in what is now known as North America have been able to develop cultures and languages and societies and really thrive prior to the impacts of colonialism and the erasure of these histories. And when it comes to how humans have been able to travel to all these places that you see up on the screen and live there for millennia prior to developing what we now recognize as their systems of agriculture. What has made humans able to travel and live literally anywhere on this planet has been our ability to modify our environment to suit our needs. So agriculture is one way we do that. Building massive cities with concrete and stone and water infrastructure is one way we've been able to do that. But that's like a very, very, very small slice of the story of humanity, but it's the only one we really focus on and talk about. And we lose a lot of the knowledge and the science and the context of the past that really is very important right now. As I mentioned, I'm currently living in Mexico City, and a large part of the reason that I made the decision to come down here is this land, by the time that Cortez showed up, was arguably the most technologically advanced and densely populated city on the planet. This city, when it was still known as Tenochtitlan, had a estimated higher population than Paris, which was thought to be the largest and most technologically advanced city on the planet at the time. But when you go and you look into the records and that were taken of how the lifeways that existed here manifested, they were far beyond the agricultural and technological systems of Europe at the time. There's, two agricultural systems that I would encourage anybody to look into: chinampas and milpas. There's still some that exist here to this day, and essentially what they were taking the lake bed, bringing it up to the surface, and weaving reeds and plants to essentially build a farm on top of the lake. And why I'm interested in that is in climate change, food security is a big conversation. So when we talk about agriculture, when we talk about how food systems have existed, we really need to give a good hard look at the knowledge and science that still exists in Indigenous communities in North America and, well, all the Americas across the world, and how those folks were able, for the entirety of human history, and their histories, able to sustain life and adapt to changes in the climate, as opposed to the context we have today, which is a great segue to the next slide, if I'm remembering how I set these up correctly. So this is the Fertile Crescent. It is an area that's in the news a lot for a number of reasons, but what we'll be focusing on today is kind of the history of this area and, even its title, the Fertile Crescent. I imagine, as this being a predominantly North American call, we don't think of this area, Mesopotamia, if you will, as being what we would think of as fertile. When I think of the word fertile, I'm thinking green with lots of water and palm trees and yada, yada, yada. And when I think of Mesopotamia in a modern context, I'm thinking desert and oases, but that's my ignorance. But why this area is important is, if you look up on the screen here, I would encourage you to look at the species I have up here: cows, goats, pigs, sheep, wheat, barley, lentils, heather, flax. Anybody on this call, I will guarantee you, has filled their caloric needs with these species recently, probably today even. And if you've ever spent time driving through the fertile lands of North America, you'll see that these are the species that dominate the land. This has been imposed through colonialism on these lands. So when you look at this area, these species are all endemic to these areas. This is where they were first domesticated. And in order to have domesticated these species in this area, you needed a form of agriculture and societal structure that was essentially geared towards being able to provide and sustain community off of the landscape and environment in these spaces. And this might be a bit of a spicy couple of sentences given the modern context here, but if you look at the worldviews and religions that came out of this area, they are also the predominant religious worldviews across the globe: the Abrahamic faiths, Christianity, Judaism, Islam. And their founding texts, if you look into the Old Testament, one of the very first lines in the Old Testament is, you know, sorry, this offends anyone with me misquoting it, but essentially it's God telling humanity that the world is ours and we have dominion over it. Where it's, as humans, our responsibility to dominate the world. Because if you look at this area, and I think this might be a good time to go to my next slide, maybe the next one, and we'll come back to this one. Sorry, I jumbled these. It was a bit of a rush. Let's compare these two landscapes here and look at the water availability. And I know these are very different scales here, but in the Fertile Crescent, there isn't a lot of water to go around to make things fertile. So you need to dominate the land. You need to build canals, irrigation system, things that are super labor intensive, and require a huge amount of structured input in order to have that kind of agriculture that will then grow the species I mentioned earlier to a point that you can sustain communities off of them. Now, if you compare this with Indigenous worldviews in North America, and I'm not going to generalize here, but I'm going to go and speak about the worldviews that have been passed to me by my elders in my community, and our worldview as Métis people is dominion doesn't exist when we talk about the land. Stewardship does. It's about stewarding the land and stewarding our relationships in such a way that there's reciprocal benefit. We're not above or below nature, we're part of it. And as I mentioned earlier, as humans, wherever we've gone, we modified our environment. And the original way we did that was fire. Fire was our bulldozer. It was our fertilizer. It was how we modified the land in such a way that we could live upon it and sustain ourselves. And when it comes to the conversation of soil health and agriculture, think about those species I mentioned from the Fertile Crescent, pigs, cows, you name it. They require an insane amount of land modification to sustain themselves in North America. Fences, the irrigation, the fertilizers. If you look up the news these days, conversations about water rights and how agriculture fits into that, and AI data centers. And then you look at the conversations around fertilizers and potash coming out of Saskatchewan. That's because the world has changed to a place where we're imposing species and food systems on landscapes that were never meant to sustain them. If you look at the Great Plains and the history of the buffalo there and the buffalo hunts, and you just put the lens of the caloric sustenance that was available from having those species on that landscape, you could make the case in comparison that for input to output, buffalo and elk and moose were much more efficient at meeting our needs in North America than what is the current system of having wheat and cattle and pigs fill that gap. So when we think about how fire plays into this, a lot of the places in the north that you can think of now with prairie in the name, like Paddle Prairie, Round Prairie, these are now dominated by boreal forest. Yet they still have prairie in the name. That's because they used to be prairies that were maintained by fire, and they were agricultural projects in a sense. Fire is one of the best fertilizers I can think of as somebody who's not a farmer. But if you're breaking down fertilizers to just the core of getting nutrients back into the soil in a way that's digestible for plants and the food web to grow off of, ash and burning is one of the most efficient ways that you can do that, as opposed to, irrigation and fertilizer, which causes this kind of negative feedback loop of chasing soil health, water retention, et cetera, et cetera. Once again, I don't claim to be an agricultural expert, but to kind of summarize what I'm getting at here is the systems that we have imposed upon the land are failing, and they are in a very delicate balance. And by braiding and marrying the knowledge that has been stewarded and developed from the original stewards of this land, well, sort of piece from Canada, North America, there's the ability to tap into that knowledge and science to make a land that is healthier and more sustainable, and doesn't eschew all those millennia of science and research and knowledge that has gone into doing so, and replaced it with, a couple hundred years of academia and people in labs and whatnot. So this kind of wraps up my kind of ramble on this side of things. And with that, I'll pass it back to you, Sonja.
Thank you, Dane. That gives us a real nice global perspective, as well as some thoughts around that the agricultural interaction with fire, and our definite reliance on having fertile soils. I think that we would like to go back over to Chad, but I do think, Nadia, Chad has a couple of photos that he'd really like to share. And I don't know if it'll be possible for you to pull them up on your screen, but can you tell us if that's a possibility, Nadia?
I'm just trying to retrieve them from the share folder. So just give me a moment, but Chad, feel free to go ahead
Okay,
if you.
perfect. Maybe what we could move into then now, Dane's mentioned previously, and Chad as well, about experiences in Australia. And Chad, we were hoping that you could share some of your experience, a bit more about your experience with Indigenous fire stewardship, Indigenous fire in Australia, and then how that might relate back to Canada, uh, and hopefully Northern Canada, Northern BC, but Canada in general. And Nadia will work on getting some of those photos up for you.
Yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, I mean, if you're a wildland firefighter, and like I always speak to Western Canada because that's kind of my area, but like firefighters have been going over to Australia in a response capacity for 20 or so years, 20 to 30 years. So that was kind of always my dream when I was, a young up and coming firefighter. I was just hearing about these folks that are fighting fire in Canada in the summer, and then going to fight fire in Australia in the winter. But it's all because the seasons are reversed, right? But Australia is a very, very interesting ecosystem. It had, like, you can tell by the plant species and the animal species that live there. And it never really gets to, well, anything we get, right. It was almost minus 60 up in the Yukon this year, so pretty ignorant weather where it doesn't get as bad there. But there's what they do there is they fight fires in over our winter and their summer, and then they do burning in the winter because they can burn throughout their whole winter for the most part, right? But they try to do their burning in the off season as it's the fire behavior isn't as volatile. Their approach is very different than kind of what we've been taught in Canada over the past 100 or so years, right? Like Indigenous cultural burning in Canada has been happening for thousands of years and only kind of really stopped when it became outlawed and we started responding to these fires, about 150 years ago. And, First Nations, they have many reasons to be doing cultural burning. The main one is to bring back certain plant species and for animal habitat, like burn a lot of good moose pasture and elk area. Like that's how and then they have good hunting spots, right? But in Australia, they're doing things because that's how they constantly manage the land. Like they use key wording on things that are a little different. Their oral history on the cultural burning is the most well documented cultural burn history in the world. They're taught this orally. Now they have, like, there's tons of organizations in Australia that are doing similar things, and they're teaching prescribe or not prescribe fire, but cultural burning courses. Basically, they think they use a different term for it, but so and it's all not for profit. They're not running for profit cultural burn programs. It's all not for profit. It's all about their ecosystem's health, like proper health for their plant species, their animal species, and the big part that's really kind of taken back is how the farmers in Australia have really loved the pickup of cultural burning, and they have joint operations that they do with the states and the Indigenous cultural burning folks, and then they also have that with the farmers. So there's so much working together that's happening in Australia. I think the big thing that I really kind of see, I have a lot of friends that still go to work there, and I always constantly have like really late phone calls just to kind of hear about what they're up to, and they talk a lot about how after the fires in 2019, they that was a really big wake up call for the federal government there, and then also their state governments, noticing that they're when I was there in 2019, there was Indigenous communities that were just wiped right off. Like we're talking like full, complete combustion. Like there's nothing but metal left over, and the plant species that were there were done. The animals that were there were done, and it's because the fires are just getting so out of hand and so volatile. And that was the first time I heard super mega fire when I was in Australia in 2019, and and that comes from like understanding that we are putting ourselves in this position. I mean, as I say that, as we, as the federal governments and the provincial governments, territorial governments, and over there the state governments, and it's because we're relying so much on our reactive firefighting response, and that's the dangerous thing about the world that we're in. Like we're noticing time and time again that we need to start evolving with our climate instead of just reacting. These fires are super volatile. So what that comes down to, we got some pictures happening here.
Sorry, Chad. I told Nadia anytime that you want to put the photos
sure,
up, I'm sure it'll be good for Chad. So sorry, that's how that happened.
Yeah, no, all good. So that's a good one. Like that's like I had to stop and take that picture because it was like that's what I'm talking about. We're seeing full complete burn. Like there's those trees are not going to be standing. They're no longer there. They're gonna die. The root systems right to the mineral soil fully engulfed. I mean, we see that in like all over our country in Canada too, but that's what you're seeing when you have a very high intense fire. So the idea behind cultural burning, and I'm not a cultural burn specialist by any means, I'm way more of a reactive firefighter, but it's just something that has always really excited me because, when we were fighting fire in Western Canada, like we were seeing some pretty substantial fire behavior. Like when we talk about Slave Lake, we talk about Fort McMurray, we talk about Telegraph Creek back in 2018, Lower Post in 2018, Fort Nelson just the past couple years, Williams Lake, Anaheim Lake, Linton. Like we're seeing time and time again these fires that are getting so out of hand, and we need to keep things in the realm of reality. Our response is really there. We're pulling in firefighters from outside the country constantly, and we're pulling firefighters from other provinces and territories constantly to try to respond for the need that's there, and we're not meeting the need. And we have thousands of First Nation firefighters across the country that are sitting on their hands. We have thousands of contract firefighters that can't go from one province to another and one territory to another. So that's a big thing we need to look at. But This one is a very good example. I love this story. We were taking we took a trip out to the country in Australia, and they were showing this is the tail end of where they were doing cultural burning. So there was like on the other side of the picture, like way over there, it's like it was when you seen the first picture. It was just a total complete burn, burnt out the root systems. Nothing's going to be there. It's going to take years and years for any type of vegetation to grow back in that type of environment. This is an area where they did coal or cool burns, and they were doing that in the spring and the fall. And this and where the and on the other side of the area, there was an area where the government did prescribe burn, where they did a high intense fire just on this in the late spring, early summer, and that was a high intense burn, and that burned so much, and then so much grass grew back. This area here, there's still a lot of canopy, but there's not a lot of ladder fuels to come on up. So ladder fuels is how the fire will creep up the tree. And when the fire was coming along here, it burnt up that one trunk, but you can see how it just kind of petered out, right? So if you see something like that and you see it peter out, like that's a great example of how these low intensity coal burns, cool burns are really effective, and they're not and they take away all the ladder fuels, take out the threat, and natural plant species could come back, and for nutrients for the indigenous people, and also animal habitats. So there's so many benefits to cultural burning on the landscape, and we also see how effective it is when it comes to actual preventing of wildfires. So one of the things that I really love when I was working with the Australian group this guy that was right down there is Oliver Costello. He was amazing. A resource to chat with. But there's also Victor Stephenson, and he had an interview, and I always remember this because I once I watched this interview he did, I thought, who is this guy? I got to meet him. And he said they asked him in the interview, looking at the fire situation, what do you recommend for the federal government to do? And he said, I'd say hop in the passenger seat and let us drive for a little bit. And I just thought that was such a key confident component to a person that had so much knowledge, so much history in the area, and so much understanding of the ecosystems of fire, and what needs to be remembered. And one other thing I loved about this is is how they bring in young kids, right? They're bringing in community. They're not, you don't see any PPE on these folks. They're burning in flip flops. They're just doing low, cool burns, and that's so powerful, right? We're bringing up the next generation very young. I thought that was really neat, but I think that's the big thing, is the big take home thing about I noticed that when I used to do prescribed burns and with the Yukon government. And every time we lit up, we had community members constantly coming up to us going, what are you doing? Don't be lighting up fires around my house. It's like understanding that what this is doing is it's creating a more of a safety buffer zone from the very thick vegetation to people's homes. And you need to light fires, and you need to teach the public and the people in the local community what good fire is. And you need to be good, and you need to be safe, and make sure those fires don't escape and don't get away, because that's where you build up that relationship built on respect with the community members on whatever you're working on. And like that's one of the things I always reiterate to all the people that do cultural burning, and then when I do it, a part of it is make sure we constantly have contingency plans. We don't let any of these fires go away, because we want to build up that confidence with the people, where they see our trucks and they see our personnel, and they're like, this is where this is something that we do, and it's good fire, and it's safe fire, and it's good for us. And we bring up that relationship. And Australia is so amazing in that. They bring the communities in, they bring that community together. And there's so many synergies in the fuel types. Like I went down to Merritt one year, and we were doing cultural burning there with some of the local Salish firekeepers and a couple other firekeeper groups. And Victor Stephenson came with his group, and they after a weekend of burning, and like doing test burns. And I was going out there with him. He managed to take a look and learn the local fuel type in Canada, and then do cool burns with the group and train us how to do it with our own fuel types, which I think is super huge. Like that's the how they can adapt, and we need to bring this knowledge back to life. We're coming, from a very like basically a time where we need to reinvigorate, like as much as about native language, we need to deal with that, and our culture. We need to reinvigorate good fire on the landscape, and I think we need to do it and start doing it with First Nations on their land, and we need to create that comfortability with the public, and then we need to do that with partnerships. We need to do that with outfitters. We need to do it with farmers. We need to do it with community members. We need to do it with the provinces and the territorial agencies. We got to do it with the federal government. We got to come together when it comes to prescribed fire, and we got to approach these things together. We got to make sure everybody's on the same page, and we got to learn from what happens in Australia. Like, a cane to reiterate, like 1 billion like plant species, animal species, reptile species are extinct from the fire in 2019. We can't we have to start taking this situation very seriously. And I mean, we're very, very good at reactive firefighting. Like that's what we put all of our cadets. You look at the budgets that we have across the country. There's your preventative budget, and then there's your reactive budget. The reactive budget is a blank check, and the preventative budget is just the bare minimum. They want to spend as little as they can, but that's not just on preventative emergency management resources. That's cultural burning, prescribed fire, fire smart, fuel mitigation, and we need to and structure protection. We need to bring all of this stuff together, and we need to use cultural burning as another tool in the toolbox, because it is a very viable way to approach preventative measures when it comes to emergency management. But when it comes to wildfire, I think it's very, very key that we look at this and we take it seriously. And it's tough because people always want to listen to us when right after a fire they're like, oh yeah, for sure, we got to do that, we got to get on that, I got to agree, and then give them a couple years and then see how much interest there is from people to understand how substantially we need to react to the situation that's there. People kind of forget about the threat and the emergencies, and they forget about how their town almost burned down. They forget about their neighbor's town. They just think about that fire that happened 5 or 6 hours down the road, and they're like, yeah, well, whatever. Behind me, this is a fire that I fought back in 2018, and now we're just getting a fire crew going in Telegraph Creek. Like, we have to look at emergency management as a whole, not put all of our money into one basket. We need to take all the tools, put them in the basket, and we got to work together with community, and we got to get more fire out on the landscape. We got to do a lot of our prescribed fire in the fall, and a lot of our fire spread and cultural burning in the fall and the spring. And we need to make this more of a priority, because the more we do with that and our fire smart and our fuel mitigation, the more these communities are going to be safe, right? And that's why I love Australia, is I like how they've taken what has happened and they're trying to be better at it and proactive. And I think we should be doing more cultural exchange with the Australian Indigenous groups. We should be sending our young firefighters like Sonja has there, and some of my folks, and young Indigenous firefighters all across, and non-Indigenous firefighters all across Canada. We should be sending folks down on an exchange to learn more about how we do that, and then bring them over to Canada, do more cross training, reinvigorate it, and make it a viable real thing, right? And I think that's always been my goal. I'm not saying don't do prescribed burns. I'm not saying don't put all your eggs in one basket when it comes to fire smart, or not eggs in one basket. Like, but not saying that you can't do fire smart. I'm not saying you can't do mitigation. I'm just saying, like, we should be using it all together. And I think if you did that, our communities would be a lot safer. And I think that you would have a public that would have a healthier relationship with fire. And I think that you would give our youth that are coming into the industry and more tools for them to utilize, because we have to adapt with our changing climate. Like first Indigenous people have been adapting to the changing climate for thousands of years. We need to do the same thing. We can't stay still. We can't pivot. And because when we do, we have to pivot. When we do, we leave communities at risk. So this year we're going to be doing a prescribed burn tour and cultural burn tour in northwestern British Columbia, where we're going to go take our fire crews in Iskoot, Telegraph Creek, and Dease Lake, and Good Hope Lake, and Lower Post, and we're going to be doing a little circuit to go into communities. We're going to do assessments. As we do, we're going to make sure we're doing it in partnership with BC Wildfire, the local volunteer fire departments, and our local crews. We're going to make sure that we're documenting all of the indices into our fire calculation books, and we're going to make sure that things are safe and ready to go, and we're burning at the right time. And it's going to be they're going to be big community events, and we're going to be burning on reserve as we have the ability to do so without the province's approval. But that being said, even though we can do that, we want to make sure that the province is with us, shoulder to shoulder, as we're taking on these events. And there's just so much more to be done from a provincial standpoint, from a federal standpoint when it comes to this. But this is something that we need to grow, and this is something that I think that there's a lot of really great people that are really trying to reinvigorate. So cultural burning has always been a big talking point for me, and how I've always wanted to get it done. And I think it's really exciting to be able to try to push some of these things forward the right way. So that's kind of my 2 cents on like what we could be doing with Australia and what happened from my standpoint. I think if you were to have some of those folks that are such amazing speakers and so knowledgeable to come in and talk about it, they would be able to hit so many more points that I can. But from my perspective on what I've seen, I think that's kind of my 2 cents on it. Like, we're all just looking for extra tools in the toolbox to get the job done.
And I would say, Chad, that it's more than 2 cents that you shared with us, but that leads us, and thank you so much. We're gonna, speaking of 2 cents and money, that's a great segue over to Dane. And thank you for sharing all that you just shared with us, Chad. Dane, we were wondering if you could talk a little bit about creative funding, and Chad alluded to it a few times there as well, and possibilities from Australia into Canada. Dane, do you have some thoughts about that?
Yeah. No, thanks, Chad. You got me fired up here. It's a great segue to go into what I'm talking about here. As Chad kind of mentioned, there's a huge amount of overlap in the world of fire between Australia and Canada, which you wouldn't really think, because like it's Australia. They got animals down there with bills that happen to be mammals, and they're somehow poisonous and lay eggs, all in one go. So when you look at the two countries, we have the same kind of pyroecology. The boreal forest and the forest of Australia, they're meant to burn. And that rhythm has been set by Indigenous peoples in both places. We had very similar, if not the same, colonial history with the same colonizer, and the current same set of head of state. We had very similar, if not the same, reservation systems that were designed to geographically and then economically isolate Indigenous peoples, which exist to this day. And we had the same system imposed upon our burns and our good fire. If you look into the first laws passed that banned burning in Canada, if you dig deep enough, there's a letter to the king at the time, and this is probably about 200 years ago, from a surveyor that was sent by the Crown to survey what is now kind of the Northwest. And in that letter, there's a quote this is not a direct quote, but it's something similar to the wanton burning of the savages is in direct conflict of the Crown's economic interest in the forests of Rupert's Land or whatever it is. And so that's the system that was imposed in Australia as well. They're facing the same problems. But as Chad mentioned, Australia is quite a bit further ahead of us in solving these things. So a couple of years back, I was giving a speech at UNFCCC COP in Dubai. And after I had got off the stage and went and grabbed a coffee, I got a tap on the shoulder in the line for coffee from an Australian woman. She said, "Hey, I just heard your talk. We should speak. I'm from the Aboriginal Carbon Foundation in Australia, and I think we're chipping away at the same problem here." And so I was connected with the Aboriginal Carbon Foundation, and who the Aboriginal Carbon Foundation is they are an organization in Australia that has had connections to the Fire Sticks Alliance and all of these different kind of organizations that have worked towards getting to a place where Australia is putting good fire back on the land. And what the Aboriginal Carbon Foundation does is in Australia, they've been able to develop carbon credits for essentially reducing wildfire impacts. So the 2023 wildfires in Canada put more carbon into the atmosphere and greenhouse gases than the entire global airline industry combined for that year, Taylor Swift and her private jet and all. But that doesn't get accounted for. That's just seen as an act of God. And as Chad showed in those pictures, when a forest burns in that way, it essentially desertifies. The forest doesn't regrow and sequester carbon as it should. So what they've been able to do in Australia is develop something called carbon farming. And what that does, it kind of takes a baseline of your emissions from, just a forest or a forested landscape decaying. And then it also, that sets your baseline and you kind of bump that up with, the different kind of fire intensity you might see. If anybody's seen or worked on a fire, white smoke is water vapor. That's a cooler burn. Black smoke, you're seeing pitch from spruce trees starting to enter the mix here. And then if you see copper smoke, well, that's when you got a problem. Because copper smoke is essentially trees just evaporating. But fire is so intense that everything goes up into the atmosphere. And it looks like that landscape that Chad shared with us there. So essentially, when you have that baseline set, and then you have those cool burns that Chad showed us that emit less carbon, but then also prevent that insane mega super giga super fire or whatever term they're coming up with it next. That gap right there, you can charge a carbon credit for. And so that goes into a market like any other, if you're not familiar with carbon credits, and private industry and different folks can buy those credits and then offset their emissions. That's great and all. But I went down to Australia last year in March to meet up with the Aboriginal Carbon Foundation and see it firsthand and see what's going on there. And we were able to get out there and meet some of their burners and whatnot. And the point they kept reiterating to me is the credits don't matter. That's not the point. Good fire matters. That's what they're doing here. I grew up in Calgary. I love my hometown. I love the people in it. But I work in Indigenous climate change. It's not a conversation people are very open to in Calgary. There's a lot of criticism of it. And when you look at Canada, and as Chad mentioned, prevention, who cares? Blank check for reaction. If you can say a fire is unprecedented and ship in South Africans because you slashed your budget in the winter and got rid of experienced firefighters, that's good PR. There's no political capital in preventing the problem. There's a lot of political capital in the word unprecedented. And then when you add on into the form of public opinion, investing in Indigenous economic sovereignty, that conversation becomes even more dismal. What these carbon credit systems in Australia have enabled is non-government funding going directly to the community to do good work. And it's one of the most inspirational things I've ever seen in my life. I was able to sit down with two of the fire rangers that the ABCF, the Aboriginal Carbon Foundation, had been working with to develop the capacity to access these markets in their community through good burns. And what they were able to do is essentially through these systems and through the income that it brought, that youth was able to spend their entire year in community, on land, with an elder, learning their traditional life ways, practicing their traditional life ways, and then putting food on the table for their family in a dignified way. That to me is as inspirational as it gets. And what we've seen as a result of this, in Northern Australia, which has a pyroecology similar to the boreal forest, they have seen a 52% reduction in the frequency of severe wildfire impacts in that area alone since they've started implementing these systems. And when I went down there and I was meeting with their burners and we were talking cultural burns, it reminded me of a quote from Renee and Solomon Carrier when I interviewed them about the history of Métis fire stewardship. And they'd say, you know, back in the day, we used to kind of greet each other by saying, "How's your fire?" And it was the exact same thing down there in Australia. That's something that their communities would say. And we talked about their burns. And I was like, Chad just showed right there. It's the young ones running around shoeless. It's, you know, there's a cookout. Everybody's having a good time. You're putting down these cool burns that you should be able to put your hand on the land as soon as the flame's out. And they're like, well, what are your burns like in Canada? I was like, well, in the cultural burns I've been on, it's the exact same thing. It's folks are curious, the kids are running around, the family's there. It's a community event. It's like a cookout. And the fire is good fire. You should be able to walk through it in your moccasins as soon as the flames are out and not burn your feet. So what we're doing right now is we've been working with the Aboriginal Carbon Foundation to see how we might be able to scale this to Canada. And it's a bit of a long road. But one of the very inspirational things in addition to this is, you know, carbon farming isn't only available to Indigenous fire stewards in Australia. It's available to anybody who is able to properly conduct these burns. Difference is, though, with the Aboriginal Carbon Foundation or the Indigenous burns that they're able to do, they're able to charge a premium on their carbon credits because there's all those social benefits that they're able to ascertain that go into the burns that they're putting on. And what this has enabled is farmers in that they share the land with have been coming out of the woodwork, quite literally, to partner because they see the benefit. They see that it's making the land healthier. They see that it's making their farms safer. And one of the shining examples that they have is a place called Palmerville Station in Northern Australia. And in Australia, on their farms, they call them like cattle stations, not ranches. And they are massive. They are the size of countries. They use helicopters to wrangle cattle. Palmerville Station is one of these massive ranches, if you will, and it has a ton of Aboriginal history and wall or rock paintings and stories. And the owner of Palmerville Station saw what was happening with carbon farming. And he called up the ABCF and said, "Hey, I've got a big chunk of land that's ready to burn. How can you help?" And so they were able to get the communities that have traditional ties to that land to come back onto that land and work in lockstep with that rancher to bring in that funding for carbon farming to the benefit of everybody involved, make the land healthier, make it safer, but more than anything, to maintain and revive and revitalize their traditional lifeways and knowledge systems and language, you name it. And it's a remarkable thing to see because if you're growing up in Northern Canada and you're young and you want to go enter the job market, your options are I got to go leave and go get an education in the city or find work in the city, and it causes a drain from those lands, and it also it severs the ability to pass down the knowledge and the science of the land that has been stewarded by Indigenous communities since time immemorial. So it's a really exciting opportunity that also really changes public opinion on Indigenous fire stewardship and knowledge and science. You know, in Canada, we're still very much in the Smokey the Bear era of all fires are bad and scary. But talking to the folks in Australia, anytime they've had to when they were telling me about how they've navigated this road to get to where they are today, they said the most impactful things they could do was bring the policymakers and the insurance companies and the bigwigs and the suits out onto the land, put a flame in their hand, and get them to see it firsthand. You can talk all day. I yell at Ottawa until I'm blue in the face for a living. It's the most Albertan thing in the world, but that's the most important thing we can do is gather people around good fire. I always think of the haka. If you've never ever watched a rugby game, you know about the haka, the Maori war dance, and it's treated like a national anthem, whether it's in France or in Wellington. Um, and the folks that participated in are Maori, they're not Maori, but it has that cultural respect and pride that everybody takes pride in. And I truly feel that good fire could be our haka. It could be true truth and reconciliation, where everybody who shares this land can gather around and be proud and in awe and take part in the knowledge and science and wisdom and genius of Indigenous land stewardship. And that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, much more than 2 cents there, Dane. Thank you so much. That was really interesting, and I think it gives us something else to think about with carbon farming and what the possibilities are here in Canada. And I just want to make sure that Chad and Dane are also seeing the chat, because there's a lot of nice comments for both of you, and you might want to respond as we go through. As we get into the last sort of 11 minutes here that we have together, building on putting the fire back into people's hands and putting good fire on the land, Donovan was looking forward to sharing what his most memorable experience in prescribed fire has been to date. And so, Don, what are your thoughts on your most memorable experience in prescribed fire?
My most memorable experience is probably one of the prescribed fire units we did, Burns Lake, where we were burning this slash unit, and as intense as it was, we still found these sprouts of trees that were planted before, and they were still alive in some parts of the unit, which I thought was pretty interesting, considering just how intense that heat was from the slash.
Yeah, I think that fire and the prescribed fire in Burns Lake allowed us to experience a different fuel type, which is also nice from what Dane and Chad have talked about too, different fuel types across the world. Um, any other thoughts that you wanted to share, Dawn, on your time with wildland fire, prescribed fire, firefighting?
Um, my first prescribed fire I got to work on was also on my birthday, and it earned me the nickname Napalm, which I really appreciate.
Yeah, that was a pretty exciting prescribed fire. That was the first ever prescribed fire in Canada for an oil and gas company. And yeah, we will all remember that. Napalm Dawn. Thanks, Dawn, for sharing. David, you were keen to possibly share something that you've noticed from fire. What is the most interesting thing that you've noticed from fire in your experiences, David?
Probably the most interesting thing that I've noticed was actually from a fire last year. Um, Spent 2 weeks just kind of patrolling and mopping up this just along this big road. And then after the fact, after the season had ended, me and my father went out there, and the interesting thing that I noticed was how fast the regrowth was, and like how green everything came back after just such a short time. And like even the dozer guards, which were, you'd step in and sink to your thighs in mud. um like those had all solidified, and grass was starting to grow again and everything. And yeah, I thought that was really interesting and awesome.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's really fascinating response of vegetation to fire. And we're seeing that with so much fire around us. We get the opportunity to see that too. Thanks, David, for sharing that. Did you want to talk anything else about any prescribed fires that you've been on, or even like the Parker Lake fire?
Um, Probably our prescribed fire on Pink Mountain. That one was fun, having to climb a mountain 6 times, and then the next morning having to get ice out of the hose lay. But yeah, it was interesting for that prescribed fire was after the burn, like in I think it was in the spring, if I'm remembering correctly, and then going back to the fall to kind of see what going back to the regrowth, what had all like grown and how much, and the fact that there was so much browse from different animals, which was especially after what the chief had said about that area, because of not being able to do prescribed fires.
Yeah, that was definitely a really amazing response that we saw on the in the halfway river valley, and noted that you walked up the mountain 6 times while I was in the helicopter, not walking up right beside you 6 times up and down. But yeah, we're really fortunate to have the opportunity to work with so many great folks here in the north and be able to put good fire on the land. We are really thankful to Dane and Chad for joining us today, and to Don and David too for participating. And we're really thankful for the 48 to 51 folks who joined us online. And I think that when we, as Chad and Dane have both said, we've got to do this all together if we're going to put good fire back on the land with good thought and intent. And we can do that, and many of us are doing that. We're not quite we don't quite have enough time to do a Q&A, but we're gonna give Chad and Dane 60 seconds to give us your final thoughts, and then we'll go to Nadia for closing from the Peace River Forage Association. So we'll start with Dane. What are your thoughts in 60 seconds or less around putting good fire back on the land altogether?
I think altogether it is a wonderful opportunity to get things right here. I think it's economic, cultural, social, truth and reconciliation, and these have been buzzwords. I don't believe that anything gets accomplished through guilt. People in Canada love to feel pride about what we accomplished in World War II. But, when it comes to talking about truth and reconciliation and what's happened in Canada, people are, oh, well, that was me. Or, they kind of, it's this weird kind of gap where we won't feel the guilt or the pride. So this is something we can give pride to. This is something everybody can gather around. People get fired up talking about fires. People love talking about fires. They're fascinated by them. It's human nature. And it's an awesome ability to not only heal some very deep wounds, but also heal the land.
Yeah, I love that. And we can all heal the land together. Definitely. Thanks, Dane. Marcy, Chad, 60 seconds or less.
Okay, bust the cane out if I go over, Sonja. But yeah, no, it's a lot to reiterate, I guess, what Dane said. I mean, I think we're all on the right track. I think everybody kind of understands like what's happening with the fire threat. But I mean, yeah, I mean, just doing more stuff with our youth and bringing up the next generation, because like a lot of us firefighters, we only have so long that we're going to be able to do the job, like with fitness tests and other things. So I think that it's really about bringing up the next generation, but making sure that we're advocating properly with our politicians, and we're educating people on a grand stage on these partnerships that we need, right? Like we need to properly fund these things, and we need to start looking at our reactive budget. And more work we do preventatively, the more work that our reactive budget will go down, right? I mean, it's a standard I mean, it's just what's there. So I think that that's the big thing. We need to be more preventative, and we need to just get more fire out on the land. That's how the Australians do it. They just went out there and started doing it. I think we need to get the communities together. We need to do more joint operations, and be not be scared to lean on our neighbors for help and get things done. Right. I mean, the money is one aspect, definitely, but we have to get out there and we have to start taking care of our land because, if we don't start doing it, then it's not going to get done. Like if we show that this is a good way to get things done and that it makes sense, and like the Australians did by bringing out the insurance companies and bringing out the the leadership on the political level to actually see the work, then I think that'll happen. But we have to get out there. We have to get fire in the landscape. We have to show the public and people like this is what we're going to be doing, and we got to lead by example, and we got to do it with all of our young people. So that's my big 2 cents on it all, and yeah, I think it's thank you very much for having us. It's awesome. I love talking about fire. If she gave me 60 seconds, she gave me 60 minutes. Like I'll talk about fire all day. So thanks a lot for having us. And yeah, I learned a lot. Dane, you did awesome. It was great listening to your chats, man.
Thanks, Chad, Madhu. Thank you. Thank you to Dane too. And thanks again, everybody online. Chad and Dane, they are easy to find online if you Google them. They may or may not put their email addresses in the chat group in case people want to get in touch with them. And without further ado, we'll hand it back over to you, Nadia, for some closing remarks. And big round of applause. Yeah, big, huge round of applause to everybody that participated. And thanks to Dane and Chad. Over to you, Nadia.
Thank you so much, Sonja. As I'm pulling up my slides here, I just want to give a big thank you to both Chad, Dane, David, and Dawn, and Sonja for being such an amazing moderator as well and keeping us all on track. And the way I started working with Sonja was around this entire bigger project of ruralization of wildfire in the Pyrocene. The Pyrocene being the time period that we're kind of in, and living in a rural area where help is often a long time away. We find it very important that people are enabled to help themselves when fire comes, and also kind of get them fired up about things like prescribed fire and then sharing with the cultural burning as well. So in preparation of all that, we do believe that it's really important for people to be safe while they do fire. And so together with Sonja and her team, we're putting on 2 fire schools coming up here at the end of May. We're putting them on at a really affordable price of $175 a person, which is cheaper than the other outfit in town that's going to do one as well. So please join us. Sonja's schools are always amazing, and you're gonna see probably uh, yeah, her crew there as well. So you can sign up there, and then if you want to know more about the bigger project that we're also doing around looking at the soil carbon and soil microbiology, and also some other webinars that Sonja and I have done together, you can go to this QR code and the Peace River Forge Association website, and it'll have everything there for you as well. So in the interest of time, we're right at 1:30, and thank you again for all the speakers, the panelists, uh, Sonja, everybody who came, and people who put notes in the chat. Thank you so much. And just, yeah, let's keep the conversation hot and going. All right. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone.